All right, today we're going to talk about something that can be, well, pretty tough. We're diving into those subtle and sometimes not so subtle power plays in a marriage. You know, the stuff that can turn what should be a partnership into a total psychological battlefield. So let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like your spouse is kind of pulling the strings? Like you're constantly second guessing yourself, questioning your own sanity even? Or maybe you find yourself just giving in without really knowing why? If any of that hits close to home, then you're definitely in the right place. You know, a marriage is supposed to be this incredible union of equals, right? A real team. But what happens when that balance gets twisted? The tricky thing is, these toxic control games, they often don't look like control. They can be disguised as caring or just, how relationships are, which makes them so hard to spot. Okay, let's call these control games what they really are. It's a form of psychological warfare. Seriously, it's not usually about obvious threats or yelling. It's much more subtle. These little tactics that just slowly, piece by piece, chip away at your self-esteem until you start to feel completely dependent on your partner. So, what do these power plays actually look like in real life? Well, we're about to pull back the curtain on some of the most common tactics out there, because once you learn to spot these games, you can finally start to see what's really going on. Let's start with one of the most sneaky tactics of them all. This phrase, I bet it sounds familiar to some of you. It's a classic line designed to make you feel like you're the one who's crazy. But what's really happening? It's a cold, calculated move in a control game. This has a name, and it's called gaslighting. The term actually comes from an old play where a husband literally dims the gas lights in their home and then tells his wife she's imagining it to make her think she's going insane. And in a marriage, it's the exact same principle. A partner repeatedly denies your reality, and over time, your confidence just crumbles until you feel like you have to rely on them to know what's true. And don't think for a second that this is some rare thing. It is incredibly common. Get this. A study in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence found that a staggering 40% of people in abusive relationships experience gaslighting. 40%. It's a quiet weapon, but wow, is it devastating. Okay, now for the next tactic. Sometimes the most powerful move is to say nothing at all. Silence. It can be a powerful weapon, a way to punish someone and exert total control without ever raising your voice. Yep, we're talking about the silent treatment. And it's so effective because, as humans, we are fundamentally wired for connection. In fact, research shows that social isolation, being ignored, lights up the exact same pain centers in our brain as a physical injury. It literally hurts. And a controlling partner is using that deep, biological fear to make you crack and give them what they want. All right, here's another phrase you might have heard. It's a classic setup, isn't it? This is the launching pad for a guilt trip, which is basically a form of emotional blackmail. And it works by preying directly on your love and your empathy. See, when your partner weaponizes guilt, what they're really doing is training you. They're conditioning you to ignore your own needs. And if that happens again and again, it just completely erodes any healthy boundaries you have. You end up in this dynamic where it's always about them, and your needs just disappear. And please, don't underestimate how serious this is. Data from the National Domestic Violence Hotline is pretty shocking. This kind of emotional abuse shows up in over half of all reported domestic violence cases. It's like this hidden wound that just festers and causes damage for years and years. The next tactic we're going to look at might seem like it's about money, but trust me, it's all about power. We're talking about financial control. This is when one partner controls all the money, maybe gives the other an allowance like they're a child. The goal isn't to be good at budgeting. The goal is to create total dependency. It's about making it practically impossible for you to ever leave. And how common is this? The number is just jaw-dropping. A report from the Financial Abuse Project found that economic abuse is a factor in 99% of domestic violence cases. 99. That means it's a nearly universal tool used to trap a partner. It's almost always there. Now, let's talk about jealousy. Look, a little bit of jealousy can be a normal human emotion, but there is a huge, bright line between that and what we call pathological jealousy. Healthy jealousy might spark a conversation. Pathological jealousy, though, that's obsessive. That's checking your phone, constantly accusing you of things with zero proof, trying to cut you off from your friends and family. And that is a major red flag and a key predictor of violence. Here's another one. Does this sound familiar? That's the sound of someone playing the victim card. This whole tactic is about manipulating you by using their past suffering or maybe even exaggerating illnesses as a kind of shield. It forces you into this role of being their permanent caregiver. It completely exploits your natural compassion and turns the relationship into a one-way street. And the toll on the giving partner is immense. Psychologists call it caregiver burnout. And get this, their risk of developing depression can actually double.
So this all leads to a really important question, right? Why? Why do people do this stuff? It's usually not because they're just evil. More often, it's rooted in some really deep-seated psychological issues.
A lot of times, this controlling behavior comes from stuff like unresolved trauma, or maybe they grew up in a house where this was just normal. It can also stem from this deep, profound insecurity and a terrifying fear of being abandoned. And yeah, in some cases, you're looking at personality disorders like narcissism. But, and this is super important, understanding why they do it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't excuse the behavior. Okay, so we've identified the games, we've looked at where they come from. Now let's get to the most important part of all. How do you break the cycle? How do you start to reclaim your own power? And let's be real, the stakes are incredibly high. Marriages that are filled with these kinds of control games, they have a 70% higher divorce rate. That constant control it completely destroys trust, it kills any real intimacy, and it leaves behind some pretty deep scars. So what can you actually do? Well, it starts with you. Step 1 is to trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Keeping a journal can be a game changer for spotting patterns. Then you can take action. You can try to communicate openly, set firm, non-negotiable boundaries. And if that's not working, seeking therapy, either for yourself or as a couple, is an absolutely critical step. And we have to be honest here about a really tough reality. Not every relationship can be fixed. Sometimes the healthiest, safest, and bravest choice you can make is to leave. If that's where you are, please, please know that you are not alone and that support is out there. At the end of the day, just recognizing these games for what they are is the first huge step toward disarming them. It's how you start to take your power back. So we'll leave you with this to think on. In your own relationships, where do you draw the line between healthy compromise and toxic control?